Today on BRStv, we have BRS media reactors. Hi, I'm Ryan, your host of BRStv, where each week we cover a new topic related to reefing. This week we're going to tell you what a BRS media reactor is for, help you select the right one for you, and show you a couple of install tips. Media reactors are designed to efficiently pump water through various filtration medias and remove contaminants like color pigments, dissolved organics, odors, phosphates, coral toxins, and medications. Most of these medias can be used in a simple media filter bag and just thrown in the sump somewhere. A reactor, however, has several advantages, the biggest being by pumping the water through a cartridge containing the filter media, it allows you to ensure that virtually all of the tank's water volume comes in contact with the filtration media several times a day. This will increase the efficiency of the media and not only allow it to filter the water better, but also increase the usable life and long-term effectiveness of the media, meaning better performance and lower costs over time. By far, the most common medias used in reactors these days are activated carbon and GFO, so we're going to focus on using a reactor with these medias. The BRS reactors come in 4 models, the single, deluxe, dual, and mini. The single is what the team recommends in most cases because it's sized correctly for most tanks, can be used with either media, and it's easy to use. Installation's easy, just slide the valve and pump on the intake and insert the return tube. Then mount the reactor on the wall or inside your cabinet. Feel free to trim up the tubes as needed. The best tool for that is this inexpensive RO tubing clip. Alternatively, you can just set the reactor right in your sump rather than mounting it on the wall. In this case, I'd shorten the tubes up quite a bit to make the reactor pretty compact. The single and single deluxe are going to perform basically the same, and most of the differences are a more robust build quality and aesthetics. The cap is a single molded unit. The integrated push connects are lower profile. The canister is polished and easier to see through. The deluxe comes with a couple extra fittings, and most people prefer the black styling. The dual reactor has 2 canisters which run in series, which has a couple of advantages with the ability to run both carbon and GFO in separate canisters and only requires 1 pump. Running them in separate canisters rather than mixed has significant long-term cost advantages because the GFO typically lasts much longer than the carbon, which means you can leave the GFO in for its full usable life and replace the carbon more frequently, something that would be very difficult if you mix the 2 medias together. For these reasons, the dual reactor is our most popular reactor. There is one consideration here, which is that carbon will collect tank debris over time and slow the flow rate down, which will affect the tumbling of the GFO. You will have to tune the flow with the included valve from time to time to keep the GFO tumbling properly. If you do want to run both types of media and you're the type of reefer that has the space and doesn't mind spending a few bucks to reduce maintenance, I'd really recommend running 2 single reactors running off their own pumps because this installation doesn't require as much tuning. The last reactor is the mini, which is about half the size of the other reactors. It's too small to tumble GFO, but it can hold either carbon alone or a mix of carbon and GFO securely. For carbon alone and a high quality carbon like the ROX 0.8, the mini is good for most tanks up to 100 gallons. With a suggested mix of 2/3 carbon and 1/3 high capacity GFO, it can hold enough GFO for a tank around 40 gallons. I personally like the mini for carbon alone because it's so easy to securely hold a relatively small amount of carbon in place. It's low profile and easy to use. There are 3 ways to fill and use larger 10-inch cartridges found in the single and duals. If you're using GFO alone, you can remove both of the sponge pads, use the GFO instructions or GFO calculator to identify how much to use, add it to the cartridge, reassemble the cartridge and reactor, and place it on the wall mounts or in the sump. Before you turn the pump on, place the return line into a container like a bucket. We're going to use this to rinse the GFO and collect the dusty fines. Just turn on the pump and flush the fines out into the bucket. This should just take a minute or so. Once the water runs clear, replace the return line into the sump. Now use the valve to adjust the flow rate. We want the GFO to have a slow, steady tumble. Tumbling doesn't necessarily make the media perform better. It just prevents it from solidifying into a block. The goal is just to make sure all the granules turn over at least a few times a day and stay free of each other. We don't want it tumbling super vigorously because the media would eventually grind itself to dust. It's likely okay if a portion of the cartridge doesn't appear to be moving rapidly, as long as it looks like over the next hour or so the granules will likely turn over. Keep in mind this isn't an exact science, and the only goal is here for it to not be so slow that it stops moving and turns into a block, or so intensely vigorous that it slowly grinds itself up. With carbon alone, you're going to use the foam pads to hold the carbon in place. Use the instructions or carbon calculator to find out how much to use, then push one foam pad down enough to hold the carbon and place a second foam pad on top and reassemble. The goal is to hold the carbon securely so it doesn't tumble. Other than looking cool, tumbling doesn't have any real performance benefits. Carbon's also a softer material which will grind itself to dust fairly easily if you tumble it. If it settles out a bit and there's a tiny bit tumbling at the top, it's no big deal. We just want to avoid the carbon from continually turning over on itself. After you reassemble the cartridge and reactor, you'll want to rinse the carbon just like you would the GFO. The last way you can use a single cartridge like this is to mix the GFO and carbon together. You can make a mix of 2/3 carbon and 1/3 GFO and use it the same way you would carbon, which is use the foam pads to hold the medias in place. It's important not to tumble the mix because the harder GFO will easily grind the carbon to dust over time. With the medias mixed together like this, the carbon acts as a separator between the individual GFO granules, so we don't have to be as concerned about the GFO turning into a big block. Mixing the two is obviously a lot easier. However, the disadvantage of this is GFO lasts a lot longer than carbon in most cases, so you might have to replace the GFO carbon mix before the GFO is completely depleted. Well, this isn't the most cost-effective solution. GFO is pretty cheap these days, so ease of use might make mixing the two attractive to many reefers. With the dual reactor, most people install the GFO reactor in the first reactor chamber and the carbon in the second. This allows the carbon to likely capture the few fines created from the GFO tumbling. With the BRS Mini, which has a much shorter media cartridge, there's no room to tumble GFO, but it will hold up to 3/4 of a cup of carbon securely, or a mix of half a cup of carbon and a 1/4 cup of GFO. One note on noise, these things run basically silent with the Cobalt Aquatics MJ1200. If they do make any noise, it's likely because a pump or tubing is touching something and transferring some vibration. Just move the pump or tube and it'll likely be silent again. You could also put some silicone pads like the ones we stock from OXO between the pump or tube and what it's touching. We have somewhere between 50 and 100 reefing videos planned for release this year, so make sure to hit that subscribe button. If you can't wait, check out our library of hundreds of reefing videos, which include some of my favorites like 30 OXO products for reefing in 60 seconds, Ending the Debate, the truth about carbon blocks, and RODI auto top off done safely. See you next week with another episode of BRStv.